And why don't we start with Tamala? If you could tell us a little bit more about what you studied in school and your role in organization today, and then we'll get to all of the in-between in the panel.
Sure, I'm Tamala Gotze. Thank you so much for joining the panel. I was a 91 grad. I was a double major in economics and international studies, and went to law school after that. And currently I am a managing director at Goldman Sachs in New York. And I have 2 kids, one on each side of me, and live with my husband here in Connecticut.
Great, thanks Tamala. And we'll move to David next.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all and to be here today. My name is David O. I am based in Newport Beach, California. I graduated from Northwestern in '94 with a double major in mathematical methods in the social sciences and economics. I'm currently an EVP at PIMCO and am leading our equity sales efforts in the Americas. I have 2 daughters here. They're 14 and 10, and we'll share with you more about the career journey as we get into the conversation.
Great.
Hi, I'm Julie Flay Windham. It's a pleasure to be here, guys. I'm a Chicago native, huge Cubs fan, but now I live next door to David in Orange County, California. Weather's a great reason to be there. I was an economics major at Northwestern, and I currently work both at University of California, Irvine as an accounting professor, and also at KPMG in our advisory practice, which is one of the big 4 accounting firms.
Great, thanks for these introductions. Excited to hear more from you all as we get into the panel. And Julie, we'll start with you with this next question. It's a big question, but we'd love to kind of dive into a little bit more about the specifics of what you do in your role today, along with what was impactful for you while you were on campus at Northwestern that led you to consider a path in finance. So classes, experiences, etc. And we'll start with Julie.
Absolutely, thank you. I would say that our background at Northwestern, we have that, College of Arts and Sciences background, even though it's an economics degree and business focused, you get a wide variety of classes to look at. So I initially wanted to start out in advertising and marketing. I did not take the traditional economics role initially out of school. I went and worked kind of in an advertising side of a marketing company. Did that for a while, moved to California, and then entered the traditional banking area. Worked for Security Pacific, which is now Bank of America. While I was there, I went and got my master's, my MBA, and I focused in accounting and switched into the accounting profession. So I've had kind of a varied path to get to where I'm at. What I currently do in my role, I worked 10 years in the audit side of the practice, and now I work in advisory. So traditionally, our KPMG office in Chicago is going to recruit from Northwestern and will recruit into our advisory practice. So that's where we have mostly, economics, valuation, different types of many different practices, aside from the traditional, of course, accounting, which we don't specialize in at Northwestern. So my role at KPMG has changed, as many on the panel have, but I started out in audit, moved to advisory, work in kind of the IT advisory side of the practice right now, and have worked in industry, worked as a director of external reporting at a public company, went into consulting, came back to KPMG. So now I currently work at KPMG in our advisory practice and work as a professor at University of California, Irvine, in our undergraduate and our Masters of Accounting program.
Great. And Julie, I know you mentioned like the breadth of experience at Northwestern. Can you share any like specific classes that were really memorable, or internships, or
Absolutely. I took an advertising class. The advertising class really piqued my interest in that field. That's one of the reasons I kind of diverted there. But I think our economics program is just, it's still world renowned. So we get top professors I still remember Mary Alice Schulman. I mean, we had advisors to the president that were there, and it was just very inspiring to see how much they influenced a lot of our finance and business. That perspective alone, being among other students that were sharing their knowledge and expertise and kind of collaborating when we were in classes, is kind of what inspired me and also convinced me I was in the right path. I was in an area that was going to be plentiful with jobs, have great opportunity for advancement and finding career paths that were maybe a little unique instead of staying in the traditional path, and lots of opportunities. So I think primarily I would say the instructors and professors I had at Northwestern, as well as the quality of our student body, were probably what inspired me the most to stay in finance.
That's great. Thanks, Julie. And David, same question for you, a little bit more about what you're up to today, the specifics of your work, and then those impactful experiences on campus.
Sure. I'm at PIMCO, who you may know is a global investment management firm. We manage about $2.2 trillion of our clients' investments today. And I'm on the client side of the business. As mentioned, I lead our equity sales efforts. I started my career at PIMCO about 10 years ago in the healthcare channel. So I was covering about 80 clients, primarily in the Midwest, across their investment pools. I then transitioned and led and managed our institutional business development efforts. So what we were responsible for was really bringing new clients into the firm in the institutional business. So working primarily with healthcare institutions and corporations, managing their retirement and operating funds as well. And then about 2 years ago, it transitioned and taken on this leadership role at PIMCO to develop a strategic growth area of equities, which is a smaller relative business to fixed income, which has been our traditional mainstream business since we were founded 40, 50 years ago. The classes I'd say that have been really helpful for me in my career, as mentioned, I majored in MMSS. Do we have MMSS majors out there? I can't see everyone, but if so, feel free to raise your hand if we can spot you. I'd say that the classes were terrific and very helpful for me as I started my career in finance. I did kind of take a couple of pivots before returning back to finance, but throughout, I would say that just the kind of pressing to use your analytical quantitative skills to solve problems has carried with me through my career. On the economic side, I use macroeconomics every day, just watching the markets, figuring out what's making the market move, Fed policy, government, fiscal policy as well. So I'd say all of that, those have been an underpinning for me in my investment management career.
Great, thanks, David. And Tamala, same question to you on your role now and those experiences on campus that students can relate to.
Sure. So I run a group in Goldman called Conflict Resolution Group. I head the Americas. What we do is we basically solve conflict problems for the firm. We get about 30,000 conflict checks a year. So it's very high volume, any kind of opportunity that comes in the firm where we have to assess whether we can take on the opportunity. Obviously, it's very different than what I studied at Northwestern. I studied economics. That was my major. And then I also had another major in international studies, which I would consider kind of like my other interests besides just economics. And so I took a very indirect path to getting to where I am now. I went to law school after Northwestern, and I practiced law in New York for about 3.5 years. I was a tax lawyer. So I kind of picked tax because it was a lot more related to my interest in economics. And then I realized that I really didn't want to be being a lawyer. I really wanted to be in finance, and I switched to banking. And I went to a group on the investment banking side that focused on tax-related finance transactions. And I ended up doing something very different, like structured finance, when I got to Goldman. And I moved around the firm a lot. I've had probably 5 different jobs here. on the finance side, on the trading side, on the managerial side, and on the investing side, and took the culmination of all those experiences into this role, which I am now, which is actually my favorite job that I've had. But I think everything that I've done, I mean, my economics background is instrumental, as is my law background, by the way, to what I do. It helps me a lot into thinking about, the way commercial transactions should result. What's the optimal outcome for the firm from a commercial perspective. I do cost benefit analysis all the time, so I think it's been extremely useful into what I do, as well as my legal background. In terms of my experiences and courses at Northwestern, I really did enjoy a lot of my economics courses. In particular, I remember my first economics course was a 7 a.m. course with Dr. Eisner. It was Intro to Economics, and it was a ridiculous time to get up, thinking about it now. So I'm sorry for you guys if you have to wake up at 7 a.m. But I remember that course for me was just thrilling. It was a macroeconomics course. And then I just continued down the path of taking other courses. I really enjoyed international finance because I learned a lot about derivatives, which I used a lot in my job. And it's incredible how much you retain. So do pay attention because it will come in handy. The one course I regret not paying more attention to was econometrics. I took that class my last semester of my senior year, and I wouldn't recommend that because that's a semester that you generally coast, and that's not a course you can coast through. So I would suggest that you take that much earlier and it's obviously a very, very useful class and many different paths in the social science careers. And then in terms of my experiences, I was a research assistant for Dr. Eisner and then for Dr. Marisi. I don't know if Dr. Marisi is still there, but they were phenomenal experiences for me. And both of them have become mentors to me. In fact, Dr. Marisi tried to recruit my parents into enrolling me into the economics program at Northwestern and getting my PhD. My parents rejected that because they were very traditional and they wanted me to go to law school if I wasn't going to medical school. And but I found my way back. So I would say that either way, this is the path that I would have taken, whether it was through some sort of economics studies or through law and back to finance.
So interesting. That's great to hear the impact that those experiences on campus have, through the different roles throughout your career. That's great. And Tamala, we'll start with you for this next question. I know we've mentioned a little bit as the panel got going about your first jobs after undergrad, but I know that's, hot on our students' minds of what is that first job out of school. And so I want to just dive into that a little bit. And if you can think back to when you were 22 or, leaving law school at 25 or whatever it was, to that first job, was it your plan A? And if it wasn't the perfect job for you, how did you go about strategizing the next role from there?
Great question. I went straight to law school, as I mentioned. And if I had to do it over again, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably would have worked for a couple of years before going to law school. I think a lot more people are doing that now. And all of my friends in law school had worked a couple of years. And I think that their experiences were probably deeper. And probably they appreciated being in school more than I did. So I would recommend having some work experience before going to law school or obviously business school, which a lot of people do. In terms of my first role out of law school, I kind of took a flyer. I didn't want to go back to Chicago and I decided to just go to New York. I didn't know anyone in New York, but I thought I would try it. And I worked, that was my first choice. I knew I wanted to work in a big firm in New York, but when I got there, I realized that working in a big firm in New York isn't what I wanted. Certainly other people have different wants and needs, but I realized that I didn't want to be, and I was doing a rotation in corporate law. I didn't like it. And I just found it to be not necessarily using the parts of my brain that I like to use. And so I decided to go to tax because I'd really enjoyed finance courses and then my tax courses in law school. And I really liked being a tax lawyer. But at the end of the day, I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer. And I knew that within the first 5 months of being a lawyer. And so everything I did from that point was to try and get me into finance. And so I enrolled in a master's program in tax to beef up my knowledge of tax and economics at NYU. And I knew that if I did that, that it would position me in a better way to move laterally into a finance position. And it did. In fact, when I got a call 3 years later from a headhunter, they told me specifically that they wanted a tax lawyer who had this master's in tax from NYU to move to the business side. And so it was instrumental in positioning me for the move to finance. And so it's all about kind of like building your stepping stones.
That's great. Thanks, Tamala. And yeah, David, you're up next.
Yeah, sure. When I graduated from Northwestern, my first job was in investment banking with JP Morgan on Wall Street. I had an internship with them between my junior and senior year and decided to return. So that was my plan A. Thankfully, that had worked out for me at that time. The reason why I pursued that career initially out of school was that I did want to go back to business school. That was a goal of mine, and I thought that would be the best opportunity for me to learn and prepare myself to apply for business school. Thankfully, after about 5 years of working at JP Morgan, I did attend Harvard Business School as well, and then transitioned from there. But during those 5 years, had a really an excellent experience. I mean, worked really hard. I think I'm still recovering from the hours that I worked in my first 5 years out of school, but it was a great experience. I worked first in New York in the M&A group, then went out to the Chicago office, back to Chicago. We were in the AT&T building downtown, and worked as an analyst in general corporate finance. Went back to New York in the derivatives debt capital market group for about a year before getting promoted to associate and moved out to Los Angeles. I made it back to Southern California for my last couple of years before going to business school. So I'd encourage you, if you do have grad school in mind, it is worth thinking about as sort of an interim goal, and how you can set yourself up for that. Really setting yourself up to learn as much as possible and to gain the experience to build a resume for your application as well.
That's great. Thanks, David. And Julie, your thoughts on this question?
And I think folks, you're getting a lot of good advice from the panel here. All three of us have an advanced degree, and having that work experience ahead of time is a good recommendation. I know initially I wanted to go straight into, Northwestern's Kellogg when I graduated. And one of the feedbacks from Kellogg was, hey, go get some work experience first. And honestly, after getting the work experience, I was so much more able to contribute and more relevant in an MBA course compared to the students that we would work with that were coming straight out of undergrad. It makes a big difference. It really does groom you and mature you a little bit more and have you ready to participate in those graduate level discussions and analytics. I will add one more thing to my initial discussion about classes at Northwestern. I would say at KPMG, and also if you're going to go work somewhere as an analyst, one of my undergrad minor type areas was literature and writing. Business writing is extremely important for what we do, at least at KPMG, and being able to articulate what you're analyzing and discussing in a manner that's both succinct and accurate. So being able to do that is a key characteristics that I'm seeing as more of our new associates coming in, not having as strong an ability to do so as they have in the prior years. So I think the writing and being able to do that business writing in a very articulate manner is very important. And if you can work on that while you're in your undergrad, it really will benefit you as you move forward. As I said, when I first started, I started in the kind of advertising area. I went to work in the advertising department of a small company. When I moved to California, I went to work for a small magazine. As I was working through this, I determined this was not going to be the career path I wanted to be in. I then interviewed with the banking industry and went into finance, worked on the finance side of Security Pacific, did that for about 5 years, got my MBA, got my emphasis in banking, finance, and accounting. And that's when I would say the next aspect and advice I'd give you guys is find a mentor. Find somebody that can give you advice through the areas that you want to pursue. So I had a family friend that was a female partner with Arthur Andersen, spoke with her, initially did not want to go into accounting. It's a dry subject. Why would I want to do that? Learned it was absolutely not what I thought it was. And it's not. It's similar to, what you're hearing from David and Tamala. You're working with clients, you're out, you're probably working, like David says, massive hours your first 5 years, but the learning curve is so steep that you learn so much in that period of time. You're exposed to so many companies that when you go to leave, if people stay for their 2 years, get their CPA, move on, you're so valuable. All the recruiters want somebody that's worked for a Big Four, 2 years at least, and has a CPA. And then they can dial you into any role, any finance role, any company. You can go into the path where when I went to public, into a director of external reporting up to the CFO level, or you can stay within financial planning and analysis, or move into one of the analyst firms or the investing firms like you see others on the panel here.
This is great. Thank you all for your answers to this one. And Julie, it's interesting hearing you talk, a little bit more about what you learned, in undergrad. Can you share a little bit more about what has surprised you about what you learned in undergrad at Northwestern that you use today? I know I love hearing, the advice, getting that work experience and then getting a grad degree, which I'm sure you use. But for these students who are thinking about those first few years out, what did you use from Northwestern that surprised you?
I think the rest of the folks on the panel will also agree. The biggest thing that we're taught and we learn the best at Northwestern, in my opinion, is the analytical skills. So being able to take any situation, know where you're going to research it, how to analyze it, and how to move forward and make a decision, it's applicable to any type of career path you may choose. So those analytic skills, learning them, honing them, getting into the new areas like data and analytics, it's everywhere. So whether it's an internal firm using all the data they've stockpiled and trying to mine something out of it, to using it to make decisions and move forward. Northwestern really provides that background. KPMG, we did a project in our data and analytics group for, the Major League Baseball. And the biggest decision they had to make was, how do we do our schedule where we minimize travel time and we get people where they're trying to recover and stay healthy so they don't get injured, and looking at that as a data and analytics model to determine the schedule, the optimal schedule. I mean, that's a cool, sexy project, right? And that's something we can kind of relate to. And I teach that to the students and show it to them and say, this is what you can do with all your analytics if you really get the correct background.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Julie. And David, anything else that surprised you in those first few years out that you used from NU?
I agree with Julie, just the analytics, quantitative skills. I mean, I spent a lot of time, hours and hours, it felt like endless hours on spreadsheets, crunching numbers, running financial models. And although I didn't directly learn that in school, what I did do with respect to projects and the coursework within MMSS in particular really helped me to dive in, be more detail oriented, run those numbers well, and pick it up pretty quickly also. So I'd say that for sure. And then just the economics, as I mentioned earlier too, leveraging the macroeconomics really consistently, probably more than I had realized when I was taking the macroeconomics courses in school.
Great, thanks, David. And Tamala, anything that surprised you?
Yeah, so obviously economics helped me a lot because when I was in careers, I had to point, and I wanted to go into finance, I had to point to something, some experience. And so when people at Goldman asked me, why do you want to switch from being a lawyer? I said, I'm an economist. I have this huge background and that's where my real interest area is. Having said that, I also think there's two things that I thought that were really helpful at Northwestern. One was just research, whether it's you're writing a paper or you're writing some analysis for, one of your economics theses or things like that, the discipline of research is really important because you're going to be researching all of your life. Whether it's in your personal life and your professional life, the idea of trying to find a needle and trying to, as David and Julia said, doing the analysis around your research, it transcends every profession. And so I think that was really important. The other thing that was really important was back in the 88 to 91 timeframe when I was at Northwestern, there was no email. And but Northwestern had this tiny computer lab that had about I think 4 computers in it up in the tech area. And my friend and I we took a computer course and we learned about email. It was at the nascent stages of email and using the computer. And that to me, that was a surprise. I mean, we were doing it for fun and we had no idea that that was going to be the way everybody communicates. And so it was really useful to try and do something that's out of your comfort zone. But that's on the technological landscape. Like, my son is doing coding now, and gosh, no one thought that would be, that was anything in anyone's mind back when I was in school. And so I would try and figure out something in the sciences and innovative areas that kind of interest you, because you just never know what's going to happen. And that might, serve you well down the road and, make you more rangy, and just so you've had a different experience than just the normal.
So Tamla, there was a world without email and iPhones?
Yeah. I got my first cell phone when I was in 1997, and it was when I was 27 years old. So much later than many of you.
That's great. Yes, it's a different world now, right? The jobs of the future, the jobs that these students are going to be in 10 years aren't even jobs yet. It's all going to be new. Which is great. And Tamla, it's interesting that you bring up, the range of experiences, broadening your experience, because I think there is that opportunity in the Weinberg College. And I'm curious from your perspectives, how you talk about that range within the college when you're either in an interview, obviously, Tamla, you just mentioned that you brought that up in Goldman. How do you talk about that broad arts and science background in interviews or, in your work today?
Look, I think it's obviously it's going to be on your resume, so people are going to see it. They may not ask you about it. So in an interview, at least I remember in my interviews, I was interviewing with very cynical and business focused people who are wondering why lawyers tend to be more risk averse. And so that makes people hesitant about hiring lawyers. I remember very specifically people saying, well, you're a lawyer and you probably have this kind of risk spectrum. You're probably here on the risk spectrum. We're probably here on the risk spectrum. Tell us, why we should hire you. And so that was a really easy segue for me to bring up the fact that I was, that my passion lies in finance, and I learned so much in my derivatives courses, and obviously I'd also taken some courses in law school that were finance oriented. So for me it wasn't difficult to raise that. I think you have to tailor your resume. You can't just use the same resume for different jobs, right? You have to tailor your resume for the jobs that you're seeking. So if I wanted to be a trader, I would focus on the courses that I'd taken that involved more risk and risk taking. If I wanted to be a salesperson, David would probably tell you, you'd probably focus more on relationship building classes, as well as your quantitative skills, right? Because you can't just sell, you actually have to know what you're doing. And then if you wanted to be, if you wanted to go into insurance, I'd say, you want to focus more on statistical analysis or areas of your resume that show that you're more conservative. I think it's just important as you're thinking about what you're applying to make tweaks to your resume to bring out different courses that feed into that career goal.
Absolutely, yeah. In the resume, and then using those examples in those interviews, tailoring it to that role. That's great advice. Thanks, Tamla. And David, anything you'd like to add about that arts and science background and how you talk about it?
I agree with Tamla. I would when I went into interviews and really when I applied to Northwestern, I knew I wanted to get into business. I didn't know what I wanted to do in business, but I knew that was an interest, and arts and sciences was the best path I felt at Northwestern to prepare for business. So I talked a bit about that interest that I had. I was undecided in my major my freshman year, and I figured it out in the course of that first year, the direction I wanted to go. But then when I determined that I wanted to pursue financial services, that took me a while as well to get to that point, to pursue the internship between my junior and senior year. But when I figured that out, as I went into interviews, it was really talking about how my education and my experiences prepared me for that, and showing genuine interest that I had in, if it was investment banking or the financial markets, you really need to piece that together, and how your experiences and the classes in education that you've had within arts and sciences have continued to strengthen that interest and to prepare you for that first role as well. So really expressing why you want to work for that company, why you want to work for that within that industry, and then really supporting it with that arts and sciences. And there's a great story there, right? I mean, you're graduating in one of the top, you all know this, right? The top universities in the world. And you're getting one of the top educations in arts and sciences for business. So it's really just communicating that, having confidence in it, and stringing it together to exactly the role that you're interviewing for, I should say.
Yeah, that's great, David. Hearing the arts and science being an asset to business school, because I know we don't have that undergraduate business school at Northwestern, but it is, that leading institution that leads to business. I love hearing that from you. That's great. And Julie, anything you'd like to add with this question as well?
Yeah, I would say in my experience, having to draw from a economics background to sell myself for advertising and marketing jobs was difficult, because we weren't coming from a traditional university that has that degree. So having to, essentially mine the classes that I'd taken and develop my experience and use some, summer jobs to kind of build the reason why they should hire me, even though I have an economics degree versus this person with an advertising degree, is just as David and Tamila are saying. You have to sell yourself on the specifics that you want to address. So tailoring your resume, that's an example ideally of trying to use what you've had in a background of 4 years to sell yourself for a position that may not traditionally be considered with your background. And I think having all the writing background and the things that I could point to and say, look, I can write copy, I can do these things, I can identify something that's key by doing research on it. I learned that at Northwestern very well, and how to analyze, and I can turn that into a really good sell for your product. That's a way you have to sell yourself in an interview. Choose where you're going to be wanting to work. And that's the whole key of 4 years of university, right, guys? To decide, is this really what I want my degree to prepare me for? And then use that degree, tailor it for your interview sessions when you want to describe yourself and pitch yourself as the ideal candidate for that position.
Absolutely, Julie. And this is a really nice pivot to our next question about career exploration, right? These students are exploring, like you mentioned, they're trying to figure out what they might want to do after graduation, but the career exploration doesn't end there, right? You get that first job and then you're thinking about the next one, and you all you've made numbers of pivots, right? So I'm wondering if we can dive into an example maybe we haven't talked about yet from your experiences of when you did have to or choose to make a pivot to a new role, even if it is within the same company or industry, and how you went about evaluating that and figuring out what you might want to do from there. And Julie, we'll start with you.
And so, as I already mentioned, guys, I pivoted once I went to MBA school and went from that banking background and pivoted to accounting. And my main source of information is going through and researching what's the industry about, talking to people that were in it and say, is this really what I want to do? Second place I'd say I'd pivoted was I was traditionally in the audit side of the practice, and I pivoted to advisory. And this is where I'll tell you guys right now, when there's opportunity, and they'll call it, disruption. Disruption creates opportunity. So when I switched into our advisory practice, it was right in the middle of, if you guys know the act when they passed it, came right after Enron, Sarbanes-Oxley got passed. And every company had to now do 2 audit opinions. One was on the financials, and now you were on controls. So now we had to create a whole new area within KPMG to audit that section. And that's when I pivoted into our advisory practice, because there was opportunity there. You could grow and try and look into a new area and move into it, even without a traditional IT background. So by having that opportunity, that, again, they'll say in industry, disruption creates opportunity. Data and analytics right now disrupts everything we're seeing. COVID has disrupted it. What vacuums has it created? That creates an opportunity for you to try a new path, because basically you start in a level playing field. So the opportunity is there. They'll teach you and grow you within that path.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Julie, for sharing that example. And David, same question for you, a pivot that we haven't talked about yet and how you approach that.
Right. I will say briefly that most of my friends and peers who started in finance with me continued in finance. I mean, they really wanted to continue in that career, pursued it, and continued to advance and progress. I followed a different route. I went back to business school because I did want to make a career change. I wanted to explore other areas of business. I had that curiosity, that yearning to learn and expand more beyond finance at that point in time. So I went back to explore, just like I did undergrad. I knew I wanted to go, continue in business, but I wasn't sure exactly where. And I started to explore during those 2 years at Harvard what type of operating role that I could pursue, what interests me, where I could continue to learn and develop my skill set. And decided to go into sales. So that's kind of how things piece together in my role now. But I had talked to some of the key professors, influential professors at the time, and had advised and mentored, gotten mentorship from them on this. And the advice that I received was, if you're going to expand out of finance, there is no better route, and not many people pursue sales. But there's no better route to learn and really build out that skill set from finance. So I decided to go ahead and do that. And the thinking was, regardless of where my path may take me, that sales type experience will carry me forward, whether it's in an entrepreneurial role or if I get back to finance. So I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to work at IBM in their software sales group. And I was selling to Wall Street. So the angle was that I knew Wall Street, and I would be calling on the financial services firms to sell and to provide software solutions to them. So I did that for a number of years, and it was a great experience, just understanding the sales process from a leading technology company, of course, that had a world-class sales organization. So I'd say that was one of the big pivots that I'll mention.
That's great, David. Thanks. And Tamala, same question for you with the pivot.
Yeah, I guess just broad comment on pivoting. I pivoted like 5 or 6 times, as I mentioned, in my career. And it used to be that I used to move every 3 years. Went to school for 3-4 years, college, every 3 years you'd have some change. And my own reflection on that has been that, as you're younger, your risk appetite is a lot higher. But as and this may not be rocket science, but as you get more and more responsibilities in life, and kids and parents and people who depend on you, your appetite for risk lowers. And so your appetite for changing jobs, and it goes down. So I would encourage everyone to think about their careers in that, with the kind of spectrum around risk and what your risk appetite is. And think about the risks of the job that you're taking, because your appetite for risk really will impact how happy you are in your job. If jobs have high risk and you're a low risk tolerant person, you're not going to like that job. It's not going to work for you. So take into consideration risk as you're thinking about pivoting, your appetite for risk, and also the risk associations of the job. The other thing I would go back to is research. If you're thinking about what's my ideal job, like, the only people that I know who go around saying they love their jobs are celebrities who act, and there are not that many people of them in the world. the whole I'm going to love my job thing is, I don't know. I don't know if you could point to 98% of the world and they would say they love their jobs, but you're going to find something eventually if you do the research to figure yourself out. If you research what you're like and what you're really good at, and what other people think you're really good at, and you try and find a job that has those attributes, you're going to be a lot happier in your job. And that takes me back to your question, Cassie, finally, to say that my last pivot to the current job I'm at, the way that occurred is I was in our hedge fund at Goldman. I was investing in airplanes and utilities and things like that. And I was using my tax skills to do that, which was all very interesting, but I didn't like my job. And it's because, I just found that the investing process for me wasn't that interesting. It was just plugging and chugging numbers into a model. And when I went to my mentor, to go back to Julie's point about having good mentors, I found one of my mentors at the firm happened to be the chief administrative officer of the firm who ran this group that I'm in now. And he said, look, I know you, I think you'd be really good at this job. And I trusted him because he knew me really well. And he was right. And the reason why I really like my job now is because I get to do what I did when I was having fun as a kid. I solve problems. I love puzzles. I love, crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, and I like things like crisis management. That's what I'm good at. And that's what this job gives me. So, I feel like as you're thinking about pivoting, try and figure out what you really like inside, what you're really good at inside, and really solicit feedback from your mentors and your mothers and your siblings, because they know you really well and they'll tell you the truth about what you're really good at. And then you can figure out how to make the right pivots.
Yeah, that's great, Tamala. And it kind of is a great pivot into starting our student questions. So I'll just make a plug here. Students, please feel free to send in your questions. I have one to get started with, but of course, happy to call on people if you send it in through the public chat, or take that question and I'll ask it if you send it to me privately. So I think we have a question. Great, Trent. If you want to turn on your mic and ask your question, we can start with you and then I'll get to our next student question after.
Sounds great. So first off, thank you, Cassie, for arranging this panel, and David, Julie, Tamala, thank you three for your time. So after ingratiating yourselves in the finance industry and, dedicating your careers towards it, what were your most surprising thoughts and perspectives that emerged that you never really considered either as an undergrad or, early on in your career search?
And we can start with anyone if you want to jump in, or we can start.
I'd say mine probably from the non-traditional side, Trent. I guess it was most surprising to me that the industry I thought I was going to enjoy was not the one that was, and that's to Tamala's point, to just say, know what your skill sets are. I do know the writing has helped me, even though I went into the accounting side. And that was something I just thought, this is the career that you use that in. And by talking to other mentors and other perspectives, there are others that do. And I was able to find one a little more targeted to my path. So I'll flip it over to David and Tamila for their responses.
Right. Well, I mentioned the hard work, and I knew it would be hard work, but just living it was pretty grueling. I don't want to dissuade anyone from pursuing investment banking. I think things have evolved a bit, but it was just the reality of it. Working those, we had 100-hour weeks at times, right? Running models. I'll tell you, I slept a few nights I can remember clearly in the office for a few hours and continued working. So I think the reality of that, just the amount of work and the pace, was something that was eye-opening, really rewarding at the end of all of it. But definitely need to have your eyes wide open on the amount of work that could be ahead of you in some of these roles within the finance industry, and just reflecting on whether or not you want to put in that effort. Secondly, I would say that as an analyst, I had been given the opportunity to also get a lot of client exposure. So the relationship building side of it. So I not only ran the numbers, but as I got more and more experience, I started leading some of the client interactions for the team. And certainly as I became an associate, which was really a post-MBA role, more and more client relationship building, client opportunities. I think much of that was selling some of our services as well. So that gave me some exposure to that, which I didn't expect to start out with at the beginning as an analyst. I think that was great experience and exposure to get that client side and really thinking about that, adding that strategic value externally.
Mm-hmm. I would say what surprised me the most was that I became a lawyer and I didn't want to be a lawyer. And I always thought I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 12. And that was a big surprise. But, and I think that if I had to do it differently, I would have taken my own advice and I would have researched and gotten to know myself better when I was your age. And just been a lot more thorough about that than having this set perspective from the beginning that this is what I want to be. From watching LA Law, which you would not know what that show is, or whatever it was. So that's what I would suggest if you want to avoid surprises.
That's great, Tamala. And I think our next question is for you as well, Emma. If you want to turn your mic on and come over the audio and ask your question.
Sure, thank you. And thank you all for being here. I've learned a lot listening to each one of you and the advice you're giving. Tamala, I did want to ask you a question about law school. And it's more of requesting some advice. So I'm a senior now, mathematics and philosophy double major, and law school has been something I've been thinking about, since time. It's something my teachers have told me, like, oh, you'd be great at law school. And then my parents have told me, oh, you'd be great at law school. And I wasn't ready to commit to law school right out of undergrad. So I'll be working with Cornerstone Research as an analyst for a few years. And I figured that was a good step because I'll see a law side, but I'll also see a business side, because right now I'm kind of torn in two directions. Do I go the law direction or do I go more of a finance direction? Because law really tugs at my philosophical heartstrings, but then finance tugs at my mathematical heartstrings. So, what advice do you have for navigating the conflicting?
So I think it's great that you're working. You're going to get great experience, and you will go to your next experience with a lot more maturity and thoughtfulness. You're not going to hear this from a lot of people who went to law school, but I loved law school. It was the best educational experience I had after Northwestern. And it was so thrilling. My classmates were so inspirational. My teachers were amazing. Though it completely changed the way I think. It completely organized the mess up here. And it helps me in so many ways, and you can do so many things with a law degree. I would recommend it to anybody. I just think that but you have to be realistic that you may not, you may want to go to finance, and it's perfectly possible to do that with a law degree. It's 1 year longer than a business degree, but it gives you, equivalent abilities to network with people that you would get in business school. And you can also go to a law school that has business school affiliations, so you can network with business school people. And there's tons of finance courses that you can take. So I'm a huge fan. I would tell everybody to go to law school. It's so value added, and you can branch out into so many different paths from a career perspective.
That's really reassuring to hear. My mom says something similar, like, even if you don't become an attorney, you can do anything with a law degree. But to me, it's such a big financial investment and time investment. I just wanted to make sure, if I can't see myself committing to a life as an attorney, you'd say it's still a good investment.
Loved it. Huge. Do it.
Thank you.
This is great. The reassurance. This is excellent. Thanks, Tamala. And I think, Javier, you might want to come over and ask a question for David next.
Yes, I'm in MSS as well, and I wanted to ask about some of the more academia aspects of MSS, like the research paper and the class I'm in now. I'm sure David did as well, with going over different models and writing papers for them. And since I know, you talked about, David, about how much modeling there is in finance, I was wondering how much doing things like the academic way really helped you in the professional side.
Hi, Javier. Thanks for the question. It was all really helpful. I'd say the program as a whole. I will say the research paper, I did use that quantitative analysis. I don't think the findings or what I actually did in the paper was directly applicable, but certainly I had all sorts of regression analyses and that sort of thing within my paper. It was all helpful and applicable. The program is unique, as you know, right? The type of curriculum, the coursework, the analytics that you go through. So that I think is going to serve you well and be really helpful for you as you take your next steps as well. And make the most out of these projects. I think I could have done a better job on my research project, frankly, and gotten more out of it. So I would say that take advantage of all the resources you have at your disposal and leverage it as much as possible to get that the experience you want, because you have that flexibility right now to do that and to craft how you want to direct these projects. Does that answer the question, Javier?
Yes.
Any follow-ups? Okay, good.
Awesome. Thanks, Javier, for asking that, and David for your answer. And our next question kind of hits on that mentor piece, which I believe Julie mentioned finding a mentor. What are your recommendations for finding a professional mentor? And maybe you can tie in some advice for these students for how to best network in your industry. And maybe we can kind of go around starting with Julie.
So I think the networking aspect, number one, I tell all my students at UCI, especially in the master's programs, all of you should be connected to each other in LinkedIn right now, because all of you at school are going to land somewhere awesome. And at some point, you're either going to be on a sales side trying to get in, on a account side trying to find an in, or find a little background inside information about a company. And you look and you say, hey, my old colleague is sitting in, one of the chief offices and can maybe give me some information. So maybe I can just go to coffee with them and get some information that no one else is going to be able to obtain. So right now, those networking, they're important. They're important to have. And back in our day, we didn't have these resources. So you guys need to take advantage of them and network with your colleagues right now, because eventually out in the business world, you could be anywhere in the United States, and we're so virtual right now, especially in this current environment and global. You're going to find people that, if you stay connected with them, that at some point, whether you're trying to get in for a job interview or trying to get a contact or background inside information about a company or some of the people you're going to meet with, it's a great opportunity. So networking, number one, key. When we started our firm, we have a number of breakfast meetings that executives go to, banking executives, accounting executives, and we encourage our associates to go and be uncomfortable. And we tell them, don't sit at a table where you know someone. The way you network is you learn to talk to people in a situation where you find out about them, you listen. And as David said, those relationship building skills, they're important. It doesn't matter what job you have, whether it's being able to talk to your boss later when you're in a promotion interview and say, this is what I've done great and I can sell myself, or whether it's as you move in our career path, even though it sounds like accounting is not selling, in order to move up to manager and partner, you have to be able to talk to clients and sell business. It's just part of our business, and I'm sure it's part of any other one that you would go into on a finance side. So from my perspective, those things are critical that you develop those skills.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. I love that recommendation for networking with your peers, because so often I think at Northwestern, it's intimidating to network and get out there and meet with alumni, but some of that networking, a lot of that networking is happening socially in classes and with peers. So everybody on the call right now, absolutely make those connections. I love that. And David, your perspective on finding a mentor and networking in general.
Right, I'll add to Julie's comments and just emphasize, don't be shy. All right, put yourself out there. If you have a genuine interest, you should have a genuine interest and some thoughtful questions. But if you're interested in an opportunity or you want to learn more informationally, make that reach out. to alum, people you may know, friends and family, and learn more. I wish I did that more during undergrad. I had mentioned it took me really to my junior year to figure out that I wanted to, or before my junior year, I guess, going into senior year, that I wanted to pursue investment banking. But I wish in many ways that I started as a freshman, kind of exploring more. I would like to have looked at trading more deeply, and I didn't really have that opportunity. So take advantage of the time that you have now to reach out to alums and people around you in various areas where you might be interested, and take advantage of those summers to get those internships as well. I'll mention anyone interested in PIMCO. I think our career site's opening on July 1 for next summer. So there's an internship for 2022, and they're going to start taking applications then. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I need to be careful because I realize there's 70 or 80 people on this call. But if you have a genuine interest, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to connect you or answer questions as well. But make that reach. In terms of networking and finding a mentor, a lot of this happens naturally too. It's challenging. I mean, it's awkward, right, to say, "Will you be my mentor?" I think it's more of having those thoughtful questions and really having a genuine interest with who you want to get mentorship from, and reaching out and staying in touch with them. And I think there are best practices for being a good mentee. So if you're getting advice, follow up and communicate too, that thank you for your advice. I did this and that, which you told me, these were the results. It'd be great to follow with you at some point as well. So I think that's going to really help foster the mentoring. I've mentored a lot of people. I've also been mentored by many people. And these are the things that I've picked up over the years. So just be a great mentee, and foster those natural mentoring relationships for people that fit with what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I've always been very passionate about networking, but I go back to the words that David used, which is about genuine interest, which to me it says it all, because the word networking is somewhat impersonal. It's just about touching someone, but you really have to show some genuine interest for that person to actually want to build a relationship with you, because networking without relationship building is not useful at all. And so when I found that people have reached out to me, and I do get a lot of emails from folks at Northwestern, I do refer people to internal human capital. But I find I'm more compelled when people actually have Googled my name as opposed to just looking at my LinkedIn. Because if you Google my name, you'll see I'm involved in this and this and that. And I'm sure you'll find that for David and Julie. And you'll just know a little bit more about me when you reach out. A lot of people, when they reach out to me, they're like, "Oh, can you talk to me about investment banking?" Well, you know what? I'm not a banker. I do know about it, but I'm not a banker. And so if you say, "Oh, I noticed you do conflict resolution," then I'd be like, "Oh, the person researched me." So I'm not suggesting that you all call me, but I would suggest that if you are going to reach out to David or Julie or anyone else in the Northwestern Alumni Network, that you Google them first and figure out who they are before you reach out. Because I think that just comes off a little bit more genuine than just a blanket email that you would send to 10 people. The other thing I would suggest is a lot of people do volunteer work. A lot of people in the finance industry do volunteer work. Some of the best relationships that I have built, both with my mentors and mentees, have been people who have joined a volunteer organization and been my intern. And that's happened to me multiple times, where I've had unpaid interns who are working with me on this community activity that I'm sponsoring. And that's when I really get to know you, because for me to mentor you, I really need to get to know you and believe you, and then I can become your sponsor. And then I can write you a recommendation for law school, or I can write you a recommendation for this job. And in the not-for-profit context, it's not very threatening, right? You're there because you believe in a cause. So does the person who works at Morgan Stanley or PIMCO, and you believe in that. And it's a very genuine interest in a cause, and you start doing some work alongside that person, and you get to know each other. And that's how you build a relationship. So I would recommend that you think about what you care about outside of your day, every day, and try to work on those causes, and you'll get to meet people in away from your normal course activity. Great. Definitely use your Northwestern relationship. That was a great suggestion by Julie, but also go outside and try to build other networks. When I came out of law school, I knew no Iranians. I'm Iranian. I didn't know any Iranian lawyers at all. And I wanted to get to know other Iranian lawyers. I just thought that would be a great networking opportunity. So I went into a database called LexisNexis at the time. Obviously, there was no internet. And I just searched Iran and I found a list of like 100 people that just had the word Farsi or Iran next to them. And I wrote them physical letters. And I said, I'm starting a network. I'm starting an Iranian legal network. Will you join my network? And I physically sent letters, and people physically sent letters back to me or called me. And I ended up having a network. I started this network of having 100 Iranian lawyers around the country. And I have to tell you, my best relationships with some people were established based on what I did. And then I ended up, like, those people became my mentors. Some of them were partners at the time, like a tax partner at Melvin and Myers, suddenly he called me and said, oh, I didn't know there was another Iranian lawyer. And so that was a really good networking opportunity for me. And then I ended up doing another Iranian professional network. I set it up. I started inviting people, got to know people. In fact, I met my husband that way. So there's other things that can come out of it as well. So try and figure out what's your affinity group that you're part of. There are probably organizations out there that you can join as part of your affinity group, whether it's like some women's forum, leadership forum, or some LGBTQ network or something where you can establish relationships with people in your same affinity group, or build an organization if there isn't one. And I guarantee you there will be people who have like-minded interests. And those relationships, I set those organizations up 30 years ago. I still know those people, and I still call people for advice from that experience. So that's just what I have to say about networking.
I love it. I love it. This is great. So many great stories and insights shared, on this networking question, but of course, throughout the panel, really, really great advice for our students today on how to build those networks and continue making those connections in Northwestern and beyond. So thank you again to our panelists for being here. We are over time. We are so thankful for all the time that you've given us today. Students who are on the call, we normally buy you lunch when we do these programs in person. So we are going to send you a Grubhub gift card. So keep an eye out for those
Nice.
information about that. Yeah, a fun way to stay connected. And then we do have another program this afternoon on consulting. And so if you're interested in that, just shoot me an email. I'm sure a lot of you have already registered for that as well. And we also have an event on Friday that we'll share out more information about tomorrow. So thank you again to our alumni for being here and sharing so many great insights. Thanks to students for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Go Cats.